Hare Krishna. Yeah, we've got prasadam that's been served since 5 o'clock, so you should have a bit of energy. So, Hare Krishna. Okay. Here we are on a Sunday feast lecture in front of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath and Srila Prabhupada and Sri Sri Gauranitha and Jagannath Baldev Subhadra. We've got a class on a very unique personality today. A very, very, very unique personality. And there's a lot that we can talk about him in the next 1 hour. So, without further ado, I'll start. Before I start, I'll ask a question, and if you can please raise your hand to answer. Is there anybody here who's from Kerala in South India? Anybody who's here from Kerala? No. Is there anybody here who's been to Kerala as a tourist? Nobody? Oh, jeez. Oh, one. Okay, you've gone to Kerala. All right. When they show the incredible India videos, they market Kerala as God's own country. So today in the course of the class, we'll understand why Kerala is called God's own country. So today's class is about a very unique personality. His name's Kulasekhara Maharaj. Now, Kulasekhara Maharaj is one of 12 Alvars from South India. Anybody here knows who the Alvars are? No. Okay, so today we'll learn about why Kerala is called God's own country, and we'll learn about who the Alvars are. Most of you who are coming regularly to the temple, you must be reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Puran. In the Bhagavad Puran, the 11th canto of the Bhagavad Puran, it actually predicts about the Alvars coming. There's a verse in which Shukadev Goswami is telling Parikshit Maharaj, who has only 7 days to live. He says, "My dear king, the inhabitants of Satya Yuga and other ages eagerly desire to take birth in this age of Kali. Because in the Kali Yuga, there are many devotees of the Supreme Lord Narayan. These devotees will appear in various places, but be especially numerous in South India. O Master of men, in this age of Kali, those persons who drink the waters of the holy rivers of Dravida Desh or South India, such as Tamrapani, Kritamala, Prayavini, the extremely pious Kaveri and the Pratichi Mahanadi, will almost all be pure-hearted devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudev." So King Kulasekhara, there are 12 Alvars or great saints in the South Indian tradition, and all of them are great. They propagate the cult of bhakti. And amongst those 12, most of them are saints. There's one Mataji also, Andal Devi, who's the form of the earth. And there is one king, there's one king only amongst them. His name is Kulasekhara. King Kulasekhara was born roughly 27 years after the Kali Yuga started. So we are talking around 3075 BC. So that's when he was born in Kerala. He was the king of Kerala. He was the king of what is... that part of Kerala now is called the Travancore district. It's called Travancore in Kerala. So he was the king of practically the whole of Kerala. He was born in the Chera dynasty. His father's name was Dridavrata. Dridavrata means one who takes a very strong vow. And his father had taken a very strong vow. His father was a very pious king. And he was born in a family line of Raja Rishis. Raja Rishi means someone who's a king but who's very, very saintly. And King Kulasekhara was a king who was very, very saintly. So he was born in a family of Raja Rishis, and his father, King Dridavrat, took many austere vows before Lord Vishnu or Narayan to finally get him as his son. Anybody here heard of the Ananta Padmanabh temple in Kerala? Okay, so all those kings in Kerala used to worship Ananta Padmanabh. In fact, the kings used to consider themselves as a representative of Ananta Padmanabh, and Ananta Padmanabh was considered the king. Even till day, that practice exists in Kerala, although there is no king as such. There is still a king for namesake. But even quite recently, 10 years back, the Ananta Padmanabha Swami temple was in the news because there were rumors that there are several chests of drawers there which have unlimited number of jewels and gold coins and cash, and the government of India actually went in there and did an audit of the temple, and they found that the jewels and all the gold coins and silver coins that exist there, it amounts to quite a few billions and billions of dollars. But keeping in mind the sentiments of the local public, they've allowed all of them to be remaining in the temple. So all of those treasures still exist. And it is because of kings like Kulasekhara and in the dynasty in which he was born, where everything that the king had was offered to Ananta Padmanabha Swami. And that is why the name of the city, the ancient name of the city was Anantashaya, or the place where you have Ananta Padmanabha residing. Today, the modern name of the city is Thiruvananthapuram. It also gets its name, the city gets its name from Ananta Padmanabha. So, King Kulasekhara, like I said, born 27 years into the Kali Yuga, he was from a very early age, he was trained in the skills of being a Kshatriya, of being a proper king, or being a warrior. He was born in the Chera dynasty, but over a period of time, he expanded his kingdom, and there were two other dynasties in that part of South India at that time, the Cholas and the Pandyas, and he was able to conquer even those parts of South India which were ruled by the Cholas and the Pandyas, and he consolidated practically the whole of South India, based out of Kerala, as his kingdom. And in his kingdom, it is said that everybody was very happy. There were very, very strong systems of justice, and the unique description of his way of ruling is that all the people who were weak in the kingdom felt that they were very strong, and they felt they were very strong because they had such a brave king and such a noble and just king behind them. So they knew that nobody can ever inflict any injustice on them. And conversely, all the strong in the kingdom felt weak because they felt that we should not unnecessarily display our strength. So otherwise the king will cut us down. So everybody lived in fear of the kingdom. Speaking of Ananta Padmanabha, we've got a devotee called Padmanabha Prabhu. Hare Krishna. So that's a sign that the Lord has accepted the class. So under the rule of King Kulasekhara, who was deputizing for Ananta Padmanabha Swami, things passed very peacefully in Kerala back in those days. And King Kulasekhara, but he was a very, very good king, and the Raja Rishis, and to Chanakya Pandit. Anybody here has heard of Chanakya in modern Indian history? Quite a few people have heard of Chanakya. So Chanakya in his famous book Niti Shastra calls out how the king is supposed to rule. The king in those days used to set aside 4 hours of the day for their spiritual practices. They used to practically only sleep 3 to 4 hours, if that, and the rest of the time be engrossed in military planning, in attending to the affairs of their subjects, looking after the treasury, the military and everything. And King Kulasekhara was no different. And he was a very, 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 very capable leader. There are very few words to describe his capability. And in due course of time, King Kulasekhara, although he was ruling the kingdom very nicely, he was totally absorbed in the affairs of this material world, which most of us can relate to. Most of us, we are here sitting here in the temple today, and you feel that it's a very totally different experience. It's a very peaceful experience standing here and praying in front of Krishna here. But if you, the rest of the week, it's a long weekend tomorrow, but the rest of the week, you're working at breakneck speed. Some of you have got to go back to work. Some of you are working from home. Some of the people working from home are actually working longer hours than they used to when they were in the office. Then you've got to look after your children. You've got your family duties. The bank who is like Ananta Padmanabha Swami was the real ruler of Kerala. The banks these days are the real rulers of your houses. As long as you're paying them a mortgage, you have a roof over your heads, and the cost of living in general is only going up. So it's a pretty tough life that we all lead in. And in the life that we lead, we are always very busy. Do everybody, how many of you feel that during the week you're always very busy? Nobody feels they're busy. Oh, geez, I should say we are living in God's own country then. Okay, nobody feels they're busy in Sydney. Yeah? Okay, that's chill. It's good. Sheesh, I must be living in the wrong part of town. Okay, but but it's very easy to forget Krishna, to think of God, because you have so many duties, your family duties, your professional duties, any other hobbies that you have, if you've got time for them, you've got so many duties to perform in the course of your life. And King Kulasekhara was no different. He had to look after a whole kingdom which was rapidly expanding. But then King Kulasekhara was one of the Alvars. One of the important things to note about the Alvars is each one of the Alvars is actually an incarnation of one of the Sanskrit word is Parshad. Parshad means paraphernalia of the Lord. Or when you use the word paraphernalia, it means one of the Lord's own ornaments or belongings. King Kulasekhara was an incarnation of the Kaustubha Mani, or the jewel that Krishna wears. It's one of the distinguishing factors from Krishna from any other incarnation, or for anyone who tries to copy and be Krishna also. That he has a Kaustubha jewel. He has a necklace called the Kaustubha necklace, which he wears on his neck. And King Kulasekhara was an expansion of the Kaustubha jewel. Now you can say, well, a jewel is a non-living entity, and here you've got a king, fully functioning king. How does that work? Everything in the material world is absolute. Everything in the spiritual world is absolute. Krishna's flute is non-different from a cow or a peacock or the tree. They're all living, actually animate living entities, perfectly situated in their relationship with Krishna. So the Kaustubha Mani, and slowly when we'll talk about some of King Kulasekhara's pastimes, you'll be quite stunned as to some. It's not proper to say something, but someone who is a necklace of the Lord can be such a great devotee of the Lord. And that tells you that in the spiritual world, the levels of ecstasy everybody experiences for Krishna in the Vaikuntha planets in Goloka Vrindavan, where they are perfectly situated in their service towards him. So coming back to our king Kulasekhara, because he was playing this outward leela of a king, but he was actually a perfectly situated devotee of Lord Krishna. And in due course of time, once when he was sleeping, there are different levels of consciousness or states. At the moment we are all active and conscious. At some point in the course of the night, you will feel sleepy. Then you will enter into a more altered state of consciousness where you sleep. If someone goes into a real deep sleep and doesn't wake up, we say that scientifically it's said that they're in a comatose state. They're in a state of coma. Then you can be in a state of shock, you can be in a state of anger, of surprise, and our levels of consciousness, scientifically it's proved, our brain waves, the frequency of the brain waves changes according to the consciousness that we're in, not the mood, but the consciousness that we're in. And there is a certain level of consciousness that one can be in, like perfectly situated yogis or even above them, pure Vaishnavas or devotees of the Lord, where they are in a state of what is called samadhi. Anyone heard of the word samadhi? Yeah, so samadhi can be when a person is totally in a state of sleep, or it can be when one is in a state of trance. It is actually a state of trance. Or you can be, Arjun was in a state of samadhi in the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. In that famous pastime where Lord Krishna goes to Hastinapur as the peace messenger, and he goes to Vidura's house. Vidura, who's the minister, his wife is offering Krishna bananas, but she's actually offering him the banana skin and throwing the fruit away, and she's in a state of samadhi there. King Kulasekhara, in his dream, he actually had a darshan of Lord Krishna, and he was in a perfect state of samadhi. It was actually a very real dream, and the king was just taken aback. And in most of our lives, usually there are some instances, there are certain events that kind of change the course of our destiny. You may find that someone who's very, very rich is not so rich today. You can find that an ordinary person from nowhere, he or she rises and gets into a very prominent position. Somebody wins a lottery and out of nowhere they're suddenly rich. You may have taken a certain decision to come to this country, or a certain major decision, or to choose a certain career, and it totally altered the course of your life, or take a certain job. But ultimately, all of these are on a material platform, and although they are important in the day-to-day course of running our lives, they don't have much of a bearing in us being in this repeated cycle of birth and death in this samsara. But in this case, this was a spiritual event that altered the course of King Kulasekhar's life. After he had that darshan of Lord Krishna in his dream, when he woke up the next day, and then the kings didn't kind of wake up to an alarm on a phone those days. They had royal musicians come in and basically offer prayers to the king to wake him up. I mean, it'd be very good if somebody, in the morning someone says, oh, fair person wearing a blue t-shirt and a black jumper, arise, oh mighty warrior. It'd be great if someone said that, but generally that doesn't happen. Somebody might ask you to get up and get out of the bed and go to work, but in the case of King Kulasekhar, look, you had all these musicians, the royal musicians come, because there was a certain time where they would go and wake up the king. On that day, they found that the king has not woken up at all. And then the ministers went. The ministers were not supposed to enter the king's chambers. They went in there, and they saw this King Kulasekhar was in a state of trance. And from that day onwards, the best way to put it is, he took more of an interest in the spiritual affairs of his life rather than his administrative duties as a king. He was still performing his duties very, very well. But after that dream of Krishna, he developed almost like a sort of detachment from this world. And not just detachment from this world, but extreme attachment towards Krishna's service. It's generally said that if one takes to devotional service very seriously, then there are a few things that naturally come to a devotee without trying. Jnana and Vairagya are two such things immediately. Jnana means knowledge, Vairagya is detachment. It is said that the Devi who signifies liberation, generally it is said in the Vedic culture, everybody, ultimately whether they know or not, are running after four things in life. One is dharma, which is where we perform all our ritualistic duties. We observe a certain part of our life in observing religious festivals and understanding about God and glorifying Him. Then there is artha, a pursuit towards economic upliftment or trying to gain money. Kama, fulfilling the needs of our senses. And ultimately these three are meant to gear us up towards the achievement of moksha, which very seldom happens with the way the other three are structured these days. Moksha is known as liberation. There are different kinds of moksha as well, which are available for the devotees of the Lord. And the moksha Devi herself with folded hands stands at the doorsteps of a pure devotee. And King Kulasekhar, he automatically achieved knowledge, full knowledge and vairagya, which is detachment, after that day. And he took a really keen interest in learning about the different scriptures of the Lord. And he used to have an assembly of great scholars and great brahmanas and most importantly Vaishnavas. King Kulasekhar came in the line of the Sri Vaishnavas, and he had the Sri Vaishnavas, who are one of four bona fide Vaishnava Sampradayas come. And the Sri Vaishnava scholars talk about the Puranas, of which the most important Purana is the Bhagavad Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Upa Puranas, the Itihasas or histories as they're called, is Ramayana and Mahabharata. Next time somebody tells you that it's mythology, you should give them a slap on the wrist. It's not mythology or myth, it's Itihas is the Sanskrit word for it. Itihas in Sanskrit or Hindi means history. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata are Itihasas. So King Kulasekhar really relished learning about the Itihasas, the Bhagavad Purana, all the Puranas, the Upa Puranas, the Vedas, the Upanishads. But his favorite scripture amongst all of them was the Ramayana, which is one of the Itihasas. He really, really relished discourses on the Ramayana. And when I say really, really relished discourses on the Ramayana, it can, I mean, it's very difficult to put into words what that means. King Kulasekhar used to actually live the Ramayana. Have any of you had the experience that you saw a movie, and you were so impacted by the movie that you were thinking about the movie for a few days? Yeah? You can raise your hand, it's okay, everyone watches movies. There's a few movies going on these days, yeah? Kashmir Files, 83, People watch that, they feel they're reliving the 83 World Cup or some of the ghastly times 30 years back in Kashmir. Well, King Kulasekhara used to have that kind of impact. He used to live his life through the Ramayana. So when the discourses on the Ramayana used to happen in his palace, depending on what's happened in the Ramayana, the king used to react in a certain way. He used to actually believe that he's in the Ramayana. Like movies and media are very, very powerful influences. Politicians these days, elections are pretty much won through the use of social media. When you look at politicians these days, they've got millions and billions of followers. Celebrities today, they actually get paid to put a tweet out. Celebrities earn a lot of money just by putting a particular tweet out, and they get paid for that. Because they've got millions and millions of followers. That's social media. And then you've got television, you've got radio, you've got so many forms of media today, and media is considered very, very powerful. These days in companies, they've got chief communication officer, under which they have a whole social media division for major corporations, who handles the company's Twitter handle, the Facebook page, their Instagram page, TikTok page, all of that. So these things are very, very important these days for any business, any government, any institution. So, but King Kulasekhara, in days that were far more simpler, and people can get very influenced and affected by social media. In fact, there's a term in social media, someone who has a lot of followers and who regularly sends posts out are called, and who are followed by a number of people, they're called influencers. You've heard of the term influencers? So for King Kulasekhara, the Ramayana was the influencer for his life. He used to live his whole life, and with these influencers, they play a very powerful role. They put a particular tweet out, they ask people, I begin my day having a chocolate cake, all their followers that day will be, baking chocolate cakes. It's just, but I'm really telling you, they're very, very powerful influencers today. So King Kulasekhara, for him, the Ramayana was the influencer. So with King Kulasekhara, when he used to have these daily discourses of the Ramayana, it so happened that when they were reading the Ramayana, King Kulasekhara, he developed a particular attachment for one character in the Ramayana, who was Vibhishan. Vibhishan was the brother of Ravan. And in the Valmiki Ramayana, in a couple of places, Vibhishan's exact thoughts are described. There's one verse in the Ramayana, it goes along the lines of this. Parityaktva maya lankam mitrani dhanani cha tyaktva putran shadamscha Shri Raghavam Sharanam Gataha. In this verse, Vibhishan is actually thinking in his mind before the war that I am ready to give up, I am happily ready to give up my kingdom, this kingdom of Lanka, my brothers, my friends, and all my relatives, just to take the shelter of the lotus feet of Raghava. Raghava Sharanam Gataha, of Raghava Shri Ram. And then conversely, when there's that pastime where Vibhishan goes to take the shelter of Ram, and this is just before the war is about to start, and all the Vanaras are wisely giving Ram the advice that, he's a demon. Once a demon, always a demon. How can we trust him? And then there's that famous verse in the Ramayana where Lord Ram says, Sakrid eva prapannascha tavasmiti chayachate abhayam sarvada tasmai dadami eta drutam mama. That if one sincerely, only once, if you go towards Lord Ram and say that, oh my Lord, from today I am yours, he takes full control of your life. Abhayam sarvada tasmai, till the end of your, and your eternal, so for eternal time, he gives you abhayam, which is fearlessness. And he says, that is my promise. And then he goes on, he adds on to the verse, and he says, what to speak of Vibhishan, if Ravan himself came to me today, I would, accept him as one of my own. So when King Kulasekhara, reads these parts in the Ramayana, he gets very, very affected, and he starts identifying with the character of Vibhishan, and he feels that all these queens that I have, all this, I won't say, not the word is not bank balance, but all this treasury that I have, the military that I have, my ever expanding kingdom, of what use are they to me in the pursuit of attaining the lotus feet of Sri Ram? In the Ramayana there's another story. It gives you a glimpse into how people back in those yugas used to think. When Vishwamitra comes to the court of Dashrath, Maharaj Dashrath, who's the father of Lord Ram, and Lord Ram's pretty young, a very young boy, and when Vishwamitra looks at Maharaj Dashrath, when generally you meet somebody, you will say like, oh, hey, how are you? How's your job these days? How's your family? And anything related to the person that you remotely know, you'll quiz them about that. Are you well? I heard you weren't well. Well, the way of saying hey and Navaya in those days was quite different. When Vishwamitra Muni meets Dashrath Maharaj, he looks at him very gravely and tells him, O king of Ayodhya, how are you progressing in extricating yourself of this repeated cycle of birth and death? That's the way he says, hello, how are you? How are you faring in your pursuits of getting rid of yourself from this repeated cycle of birth and death? And then they have their conversation and the tete-a-tete, as they call it. So anyways, that was the Yuga. And coming back to our story and our hero. So King Kulasekhara then, like I said, he's living the Ramayana, and he's living specially, the character of Vibhishan is very, very dear to him, and it affects him to the degree that he increases the number of hours that he spends hearing the Ramayana. And his ministers start getting really worried that the king is spending most of his time hearing with these saints, and he's not attending to his duties. It's like you're the boss of an office and you get our devotees to your office and we have kirtan the whole day and no work gets done. So it was kind of weighing up to the balance. It was kind of getting there back in the day, but everything in his kingdom was still being expertly managed and everything was happening. Such was the skill of Maharaj Kulasekhara. And one particular day, the Brahmana there, who's reading the Ramayana for King Kulasekhara, he talks about the pastime in the Ramayana, which all of you are very familiar with the Ramayana. Ravan has a sister Shurpanka. She goes to the forest of Dandakaranya, and she actually asks Lord Ram to marry her. He refuses, saying, I have a wife, Sita Devi, and I've taken a vow, I will only have one wife, which is Sita Devi. So he asks her to ask his brother Lakshman. Lakshman also tells her that, no, I'm married, I cannot marry you. And they kind of joke with her very lightly as well. And there's the whole pastime then where Shurpanka runs towards Sita Devi and Lakshman has to cut off her nose. The place where her nose or Nak lands is called Nasik. That's how it gets its name, that place. But anyways, Shurpanka then runs to her brothers Khara and Dushan, who are brothers of Ravan. She runs to her brothers and she tells her brothers that, this is what Lakshman has done to me. And in anger, Khara and Dushan, they take an whole entire army of 14,000 Rakshasas and rush towards the place known as Janasthal in the Dandakaranya forest to engage in battle with Ram and Lakshman. Lord Ram tells Lakshman, look, you look after Sita Devi, I will take care of these Rakshasas myself. And there's the whole description in the Ramayana where, Lord Ram is about to fight with these 14,000 Rakshasas who are armed with every intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile you can think of. But, with the mantras they could invoke weapons back in the days. And each one of those 14,000 Rakshasas is capable of killing hundreds of human beings himself. And here they are against Lord Ram, who's playing the role of a human being. And at that time, all the devatas in the heavenly planets, they look at the battle that is going to start. And all the rishis from the other planets, the Maharlok, Janalok, Tapalok. Tapalok is the planet where all the tapasvis stay. They are all looking at that battle in wonder. And in the Valmiki Ramayana, there is a verse where they look at that, the whole phalanx of 14,000 Rakshasas about to take on Lord Ram, and they say, there's a verse that goes along the lines of Chaturdasha Sahasrani Rakshanam Bhima Karmanam Ekascha Ramo Dharmatma Katham Yuddham Bhavishyati. So the verse means that there's these 14,000 Rakshasas capable of performing such terrible deeds who are standing in front of Ram. This Ram, who is such a great soul, how will he single-handedly face these 14,000 Rakshasas? And these are the questions that the Devatas and the Tapasvis are asking themselves. So back to our story, where King Kulasekhara hears this verse repeated by the Brahmana, and he's playing the Ramayana in his head. He gets into it, like generally people get into a soap opera and start crying and start laughing dancing, all these things happen. At the end of a soap opera, many people feel withdrawal symptoms as well. These days there's Netflix, so you can do the reruns, but back in the day it was a bit different. So King Kulasekhara, when he hears this verse, that Lord Ram is out there by himself in Janasthal, and he has to contend with 14,000 man-eating barbarians, he just, in a state of spontaneity, he just gets up and summons his army, and the ministers are like looking at him and doing a bit of, what do we tell the king? And they dare not tell the king anything in this mood, and he just summons the army and rushes towards Janmasthal. That how can, Lord Ram should know that even his devotees are there behind him. We will also support him, and we will kill Kharadushan and those 14,000 Rakshasas. We will fight with them. I mean, the pastime has already happened in the Ramayana in the previous Yuga, but the king is so absorbed in the Ramayana that he actually feels that, no, I have to go and also fight on behalf of Lord Ram. And he rushes towards Janmasthal with his army, and the ministers here are thinking, our king has lost it, what do we do now here? So they hatch a plan, and they get a section of the army and get them to go on a detour and tell them, you face King Kulasekhara, take a side route and come in front of him and tell him that we went to Janasthal, we fought the battle, Lord Ram has sent a message that we have won the war. And the army then takes a detour, comes in front of Kulasekhara's army. Kulasekhara says, my own army is coming back from the opposite direction. Where have you guys been up to? What have you guys been up to? He said, no, we have just come from Dandakaranya and Janasthal. We saw that mighty battle between Sri Ram and Kharadushan and the 14,000 Rakshasas. He single-handedly killed all of them. And he sent you this message as well, that don't worry, just go back to your kingdom, go back to Travancore and rule from there. Don't worry about us. And when the Brahmana covers this in the discourse, he'll tell you the same thing. So King Kulasekhara is very happy to hear that. And because he's very happy to hear that, they have a big celebration in the kingdom. They have the Sitaram deities in the kingdom. He takes them out on a Shobha Yatra. Just like we have the Shobha Yatra of Lord Jagannath in Puri. Jagannath, Baldev, Subhadra once a year come out on a Shobha Yatra. Everybody can pull their Rath cart and achieve great spiritual merit. Similarly, King Kulasekhara has a Shobha Yatra of his deities, and there's lots of feasting and singing and dancing and a big festival. But from that day onwards, the scholar, who's the Brahmana who's reading the Ramayana, he becomes very careful and tactful about how they're reading about how he's presenting the Ramayana. Even the ministers caution him that our king is extremely emotional when it comes to the Ramayana, so you please better be careful. Emotional is not the right word. He has a particular bhava for the Ramayana, and he lives the Ramayana, so you better be careful. So what the Brahman does, the Ramayana reciting Pandit, if there's any sad section of the Ramayana, he either avoids it altogether or just skims through it. But any happy part of the Ramayana, such as Lord Ram meeting Sugriva or Lord Ram meeting Shabari, he really explains that section at length. So what happens as a result of that is that King Kulasekhara is mostly listening to the happy parts of the Ramayana. And whenever he hears a happy part of the Ramayana, he goes in full ecstasy. And basically you have a party at work every day. Practically every day in Kerala, that's why it became God's own country. That's when it got the name. Incredible India kind of coined that term, but it got the name God's own country when King Kulasekhara used to live there. And practically every day in Kerala, they have a Shobha Yatra of the Sitaram deities and great feasting and singing and dancing till late at night. And when you have this kind of an atmosphere in the kingdom, naturally there are no problems in the kingdom. When you have a Shobha Yatra every day, where you have the king coming and celebrating with the normal subjects, attending to their troubles, and everybody singing, Hare Krishna or Hare Rama in that instance together, there is no cause for any malady, for any problem in the kingdom. And everybody is very, very happy, and everybody is very, very joyous and always in a really good mood. So the days go on like this, which is blissful days, keep going on in Kerala like this, in God's own country. And then one fine day, that particular Brahmana who now has kind of mastered the art of reciting the Ramayana in front of King Kulasekhara, for some reason he is not able to come that day to perform the discourse as per status quo. So instead his son comes instead of the Brahmana, and to recite the Ramayana. And the son is quite oblivious to these nuances that you've got to observe while reading the Ramayana in front of King Kulasekhara. And he's totally oblivious to the fact that King Kulasekhara can react in a certain way after reading the Ramayana, after hearing the Ramayana. So the Brahmana's son comes and he starts reading the Ramayana and explaining the Ramayana. And then he actually explains that Sita Devi has been kidnapped by Ravan. And he has killed Jatayu and he is forcibly taking her to Lanka. Lord Ram is in a state of great sorrow and distress. And he is going to, and then he meets these Vanara kings. But just when he just says the part where Sita Devi has been kidnapped and Lord Ram is in distress, King Kulasekhara, you can't, from what I've kind of described, and one has to go in those times to relive that situation, you can just imagine how King Kulasekhar's mood must have been. Same King Kulasekhara who rushes off with his army to Janasthal, he just goes in a stupor, a rage that, what is this? How dare Ravan even touch Sita Devi? I must go and help Sri Ram. Rescue Sita Devi. We'll go to Lanka. We'll go and help him kill Ravan and get back Sita Devi. And now he takes this whole army and rushes off towards Lanka. So they rush off towards Rameshwaram. And the ministers, the subjects, the army, everybody is following King Kulasekhara, thinking, what has happened to our king? And why did that Brahmana boy have to read this part of the Ramayana today? Why didn't his father advise him? And like that, they all reached the shore of Rameshwaram. And King Kulasekhara now is like, come on, let's go and save and help Sri Ram and Lakshman and slay those Rakshasas. And he's taking his sword and he's entering the ocean. Anyone here has gone to Rameshwaram? Oh, good. So you know that in the Ramayana, the Vanara army built the bridge across Dhanushkodi, which is the tip of Rameshwaram, which is almost one of the southernmost tips of India. And then from there, they made their way to Emerald Island or Sri Lanka as it's called today. So King Kulasekhara enters the ocean and he's walking with his sword and he's totally engrossed in his Leela, the Ramayana Leela, that he has to go to Lanka and help Sri Ram. And he's carrying his sword and he's almost entered the water till it's up to his neck. And the ministers are thinking, well, if we go to try to stop him, he'll chop off our neck. And if we don't do anything, we are doomed because we are going to lose our king today. So what are we supposed to do here? And everybody is just dumbstruck, awestruck, flabbergasted, you name it, as to what is going to happen today. And at that same time, the deities of Sitaram who are in the palace of King Kulasekhara, they talk amongst themselves and Lord Ram and Sita Devi give King Kulasekhara their darshan. Only he can see them when he's got the sword in the air and he's almost submerged in water himself. And the deities arrange for Sita and Ram to stand in front of King Kulasekhara. And Lord Ram is telling Kulasekhara Maharaj that, my dear king, there is no need for you to worry. As you can see, I have safely brought back Sita Devi. Ravan has been slayed. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. You head back towards your city. And then he says, just as I take all the souls who take shelter of me across this ocean of repeated birth and death, which is known as Bhavasagar in Sanskrit. Bhavasagar. We are all stuck in this Bhavasagar, or ocean of repeated birth and death. There's a few things that are sure as anything, like the saying goes. There are two things that are sure to happen to you in life. You've got to pay your taxes and you've got to die. So, similarly, in a Vedic context, any living entity who takes birth here, there are four things actually, two more. Janma, Mrityu, Jada, Vyadi. You have to be born. You grow old. When you grow old, you have more ailments. These days you have them in the middle of a pandemic. You can have them in your younger days as well. And then invariably, when the time comes, as they say, when Father Time calls you back, you kick the bucket and you die. So Lord Ram is telling King Kulasekhara that I save anyone who takes shelter of me, I save them from the clutches of this ocean of birth and death. Let me take you to the shore of this ocean. And he slowly takes King Kulasekhara, leads him back to the shore of the ocean. But the King Kulasekhar's ministers, his army, they can't see this. All they can see is that the king's coming back, and they feel that, okay, finally good sense prevailed, and the king has come back. Oh, thank you, O Lord, for saving our king. And the king comes back. But after having these kind of experiences, the king, he spends most of his, in fact, all of his time in Krishna consciousness, in activities of Krishna consciousness. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna tells Arjun that Ye yatha mams prapadyante tams tathaiva bhajami aham. To the degree that one surrenders to me, I reciprocate with them accordingly. And Lord Narayan personally sends his commander, who is known as Vishwaksena, to perform the initiation of King Kulasekhara in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. So King Kulasekhar's guru was none other than the commander of Lord Vishnu, Vishwaksena. And King Kulasekhara spends his whole time absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and his ministers now grow really worried because he starts exhibiting these new activities as well. Every day King Kulasekhara threatens his subjects, threatens everybody that I don't feel like living in this kingdom anymore. I want to go to Sri Rangam and spend the rest of my time there. And he says, I'm going to go to Sri Rangam today. And when he says that, the ministers come up with another idea. They send the soldiers and they get the Sri Vaishnavas from a neighboring country or a neighboring province to come towards King Kulasekhar's king and catch him just as soon as he's about to leave. And the Sri Vaishnavas say, "Oh king, we are coming to your kingdom and we are just here on a pilgrimage." And then the king, one of the things, the cornerstones of the Sri Vaishnava culture is that they place a lot of emphasis on Vaishnava Seva. In fact, in the Sri Sampradaya, it is said that if without any ulterior motive, you serve a pure Vaishnava devotee of the Lord, you get the same benefit as serving the Lord for 60,000 years. You get the same benefit as serving Lord Vishnu or Krishna for 60,000 years. So King Kulasekhara, again, an exemplary Vaishnava, immediately as he sees these Sri Vaishnava Brahmins of the Lord or devotees of the Lord, he brings them to his palace, hears from them, serves them wholeheartedly with his mind, body and words, and engages them in some of the other devotional service activities in his kingdom. But every day he threatens, today I'm going to go to Tirupati, today I'm going to go to Sri Rangam. So in the ISKCON movement, our founder is Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. When we invoke prayers to Swami Srila Prabhupada, we have a prayer which goes along the lines of Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. So we first offer our respects to Prabhupada and we worship him. But then the last two lines of the prayers are along the lines of that personality, Srila Prabhupada, who was empowered by his spiritual master and who was a very faithful follower of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, by whose grace he crossed over the ocean and went to the Western countries which were full of impersonalism and voidism, and he introduced Gauravani, or the words and pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. He spread Lord Chaitanya's glories in the Western countries. So we have these salutation prayers for Srila Prabhupada. Similarly, in the Sri Vaishnava scriptures, and with all the Alvars, they have a particular scriptures. With all their pastimes are chronicled in a scripture called Nalayir Divya Prabandham, or 40,000 verses describing the glories of the Alvars and the Lord. So they have a salutation prayer for King Kulasekhara, which is very glorious, and in line with the story that I'm saying, has a slight, it's got a slight comic bent to it. So the prayer is, prayer is, Yasya Nagare Ghoshayanti. So Yasya Nagare Ghoshayanti Rangam Yatra Dine Dine Tad Aham Shirsha Vande Raja Nam Kulasekhara. So the prayer for the salutation prayer for King Kulasekhara is Yasya Nagare Ghoshayanti. In his, Yasya Nagare means in his city. Ghoshayanti means announcing. Every day in his city he used to announce, Rangam Yatra Dine Dine. Rangam means Sri Rangam, Yatra means pilgrimage, Dine Dine means every day. So every day in his city, King Kulasekhara used to bang the drum and say, today I am renouncing my kingdom and I am going off to Sri Rangam. Tad aham Shirsha Vande Raja Nam Kulasekhara. To that glorious king Kulasekhara. Kulasekhara means the best of one's dynasty. Kula means dynasty and Shekhara means the greatest or the best of one's dynasty. To that great king Kulasekhara, I offer my respects with my prostrated obeisances. So that is the salutation prayer for King Kulasekhara, and keeping in line with the salutation prayer, King Kulasekhara every day used to threaten the minister, not threaten, but he used to just say what is in his heart. And he used to say that today I am going to abandon my kingdom and I am going to go off, I am going to renounce everything and go off to Sri Rangam every day. And he used to do it so much that it became a salutation prayer. So the ministers now are very confused. What do we do? And so their only remedy is they fill the full part of God's own country, Kerala, with godmen or the Sri Vaishnavas. They get these godmen, the Sri Vaishnavas, from all corners of Bharatvarsh into Kerala, so that at least that way we can keep the king here. But then when there are so many, it comes to a point where every part of King Kulasekhara's kingdom, you go practically everywhere, you will find Sri Vaishnavas, you will find Harikatha happening, you will find Shobha Yatras being taken out, singing, feasting, dancing, and it's a wonderful mood. But now the ministers feel, what have we done? This is very counterproductive, because the king is now spending 24 hours a day with the Sri Vaishnava. How do we put an end to that? How do we get the king to rule over the kingdom? So they come to a realization, the only way is to get rid of the Sri Vaishnava. The only way to get rid of the Sri Vaishnavas is to convince the king that they are not as pure-hearted as he thinks they are. So they come up with a cunning plan, which is in the palace of the king, with the deities of Sitaram, they are adorned with these beautiful jewel-studded necklaces. The ministers get those necklaces stolen, and then they come to the king saying, the deities' necklaces are stolen, and the only devotees or only people who deal with the deities intimately are these pujaris and these Sri Vaishnavas you have. So they've stolen the jewel-studded necklaces of Sita and Ram. How do we find them now? And as soon as King Kulasekhara hears it, he looks at his ministers with a fair bit of anger, which he suppresses, and he tells them, you do not know how pure-hearted these Vaishnav devotees of the Lord are, that not even a trace of evil is to be found in them, and even the thought of doing something like this can never occur to them. And then his father's name is Dridhavrata, one who has taken a terrible vow. So, and King Kulasekhara is Kulasekhara, the best of his dynasty. So he is not too far away from much in keeping in line with his name and his father's name. He orders his ministers to get a vessel with milk in it, and he asks for the most venomous, most poisonous cobra snake, and there's quite a few in that part of the world, to be put in that vessel of milk. And they put the snake in that vessel, and he says, I will personally put my hand in it, and if these Sri Vaishnavas have stolen the necklace of the Lord, then this cobra should bite me. But if they have not, then the cobra will not even touch me. And saying this, King Kulasekhara puts his hand in that vessel, and there's a famous pastime in the Chaitanya Charitamrita as well, where Haridas Thakur is staying in a place which has a venomous snake, and the devotees are worried to visit him because there's a snake there. And Haridas Thakur addresses the snake, and Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that he is seated in the heart of all living entities, and from him come remembrance, forgetfulness, and all knowledge. So the snake also knows that I'm dealing with a very pure Vaishnava devotee of the Lord, and the snake does not even go anywhere near King Kulasekhara. And as soon as King Kulasekhara takes his hand out of the vessel, the ministers fall at his feet and kind of admit their guilt and say that, no, we arranged for this robbery, it was us who did it. And King Kulasekhara tells them that the only atonement that you have is that you have to be servant of the Sri Vaishnavas today and serve them sincerely. That is your only atonement, otherwise I cannot forgive you. And that's what the ministers end up doing. But King Kulasekhara, after this incident in particular, he gets totally disgusted with everything to do with this material world. Because he feels that I'm surrounded by people who will resort to sinful activity to achieve any gain, any little gain. To achieve any little gain, they'll resort to a sinful activity. They are treacherous. Relationships here are based only on what value you are to a person on a particular day. As soon as the values disappear, as soon as your intrinsic value to them disappears, the relationship is finished. Everything is very, very transactional. Nobody, but there is a world much beyond this material world, an eternal world, and that is my aspiration. And he gets totally disgusted. He feels, of what use are these queens, are these jewels, are my treasury, the military, all this respect that I get. Every time I'm taken out on an elephant and everybody treats me as if I'm, God personified. What is the use of all this? In fact, the material world is designed in such a way that despite knowing that you're in a very lamentable situation, you're very attached to it. And which is our condition pretty much. And King Kulasekhara decides that is it. I am renouncing my kingdom. And he has a son, King Kulasekhara, and he names his son also Dridavrat, just like his father. And he installs his son on the kingdom, makes him the king, and immediately leaves the kingdom. And he's accompanied by his daughter, who is also a very, very elevated devotee. And he goes to Sri Rangam. There's another very unique thing he does, which is he gives his daughter's hand in marriage to Lord Ranganath. Lord Ranganath or Ranganath Swami is the presiding deity of Sri Rangam. Sri Rangam, the temple of Ranganath Swami in Rangashetra in Sri Rangam is south of Chennai. South of Chennai? 6 hours from Chennai by road. Is the largest Vishnu temple where active worship is being happened till today. And it's the temple where Lord Ranganath is lying down in a reclining position, and keeping in line with his promise to Vibhishan, he's keeping an eye over Lanka, protecting that kingdom as well. And King Kulasekhara marries his daughter to Ranganath Swami. It was not the only time this happened. There's another very famous Alvar devotee of the Lord, Andal Devi, who's the personification of Bhumi Devi, or this earth on which we stand. She ultimately also, merges into the body of Lord Ranganath and marries Lord Ranganath. So he does that. And in the course of this phase of his life, King Kulasekhara then composes many, many verses glorifying Lord Krishna, Lord Vishnu, and the many incarnations. There are two books in particular that he writes. One is Perumal Tirumoy, and the other one, which is known as different. There's a name for Krishna called Mukunda, one who gives liberation, and he writes these beautiful verses which are like ornaments of a pearl, and a necklace in Sanskrit is called mala. So if you read these verses, the compiled verses together are known as Mukunda Mala Stotra, or it's a book which was even translated by Srila Prabhupada here. If you can ask the book distributor outside, they might have a copy. If you buy this book, if you just read one verse of this book every day, and for practicing Hare Krishnas, it'll improve your chanting by a factor of infinity. Because most of the verses in the book talk about the importance of reciting the holy name of the Lord, and they talk about the spiritual wealth one can attain as compared to the mundane material, the pursuits of mundane pleasure in this world. But they are very, very beautiful verses in the Mukunda Mala Stotra. Srila Prabhupada used to often refer to them, and in particular he used to often refer to one verse, which is verse number 33, very famous verse, which goes along the lines of Krishna tvadiya pada pankaja panjarantam adyaiva me vishatu manasa raja hamsa prana prayana samaye kafa vata pittaihi kantha varudhana vidhau smaranam kutaste. The translation of the verse is, King Kulasekhara is saying, O Lord Krishna, at this moment let the royal swan of my mind enter the tangled stems of the lotus of your feet. How will it be possible for me to remember you at the time of death, when my throat will be choked up with mucus, bile and air? So he's telling, while I'm hale and hearty, let me always remember you. I don't know when I'll be in a decrepit position, how it will be possible for me to remember you. And keeping in line with this verse, King Kulasekhara spends the rest of his life traveling across the holy places. He goes to Venkatachalapati or Tirupati. He goes to Tirunagari, and from there to Mathura, Ayodhya, and he finally ends up at Brahmadesh, Mannarkoli, a place in South India, where he worships the deity of Sri Rajagopal Swami. And in a mood of worship, at the age of 67, he leaves his body. King Kulasekhara epitomizes a very important verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is told to us by Srila Rupa Goswami, where Rupa Goswami in the Madhya Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita says that Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Matihi Kriyatam Yadi Kutopi Labhyate Tatram Laulyam Api Mulyar Ekalam Janma Koti Sukratir Na Labhyate. That pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness cannot be had even by pious activities in hundreds and thousands of lives, like hundreds and thousands of pious lifetimes. It can be attained only by paying one price, which is laulyam is the word, which is intense greed to obtain it. I mean, unless you have that intense greed to obtain it, if it is available somewhere, one must purchase it without delay. And King Kulasekhara exemplifies and lives this verse. And I'll just end by saying that we're very, very fortunate that we were able to discuss his pastimes of such an exalted personality. Got less than 2 minutes. Anyone got any questions? Doubts, questions, comments? If not, okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Maharaj Kulasekhara Alvar ki, Shri Mukund Malatra ki. Everyone attending this